So obviously, with the New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani releasing his budget proposal this week, we find a dynamic now that comes a day after the state and Zohran say we're going to give you more money already. What do you make of the situation and how Mamdani is going about this right now when it comes to his budget and what he wants from the state in turn?
This is a confusing and evolving situation. You had the mayor of New York this week issue his budget, where he, in fairness, needed to tackle some structural gaps where the city council and the state legislature had both saddled the city with new costs without a clear plan to pay for those new costs. And the mayor essentially gave the state an ultimatum. He said, in order to balance this budget, I need either permission to do tax hikes on high earners and corporations in the city, or I'm going to raise property taxes citywide 9.5%. Now, you can imagine what kind of predicament that puts the governor and state lawmakers who live in the city in. They are now worried about being blamed for the mayor going ahead and raising property taxes across New York City. The fundamental problem here is that the mayor is giving this ultimatum to Albany without doing any kind of meaningful introspection about just how the city budget got so big in the first place. Just to give you an example, New York City employees don't have to pay towards their health insurance. They are required to pay $0 towards their health insurance. You compare that with state workers who pay at least 12% towards their coverage, and in some cases they pay more than 30% towards family coverage. So the city of New York could save about $1 billion just off the top by bringing their health insurance practices in line with what's already in force at state agencies, to say nothing about how much people pay in the private sector.
This ultimatum, if you will. I mean, I guess I'll put it in the context of the money earlier this week. Did that mean nothing? I mean, was that just the tip of the ice? Like, because that felt like, oh, here we are. Here's a bunch of money in the budget. Now you don't have to do this. That's why I think people are confused by the ask, right?
It's a very confusing situation because the mayor has talked about his priorities, and they include citywide universal free childcare, and that overlaps with something that Governor Hochul wants to do. And between the public appearances that the governor and the mayor were making, and this announcement of another $1.5 billion going from state coffers to the city, it seemed like we were on pretty smooth waters. And that changed completely yesterday with the release of the budget and the mayor figuratively essentially cocking a gun.
The deputy city council speaker said after this about property taxes, if we want to get into that notion of this ultimatum, if you want to keep calling it that, saying it's irresponsible to talk about raising them up without reforming the property tax system. What does that mean to you?
The New York City property tax system is a mess. There are only a handful of people alive on the planet who understand all the peculiarities behind it. What it boils down to is a resistance on the part of the city council to see property taxes go up on owner occupied houses, that is, voter occupied houses. And they've, as a result, shifted the growth of, basically shifted the property tax burden to other parts of the city. And that can have all sorts of perverse effects. We see that actually upstate in cities like Albany, where the city taxed owner-occupied homes at a lower rate than commercial properties. And it's part of the reason why you see so many nice offices as soon as you cross the line out of the city of Albany.
Interesting. Another aspect of this need for money is the fact that people are, oh, this is trying to pay for his proposals in his campaign. But from what I understand, free buses, the city-run grocery stores, a new department within the police isn't included in this for him.
Right.
So this is just to pay for this deficit.
The first thing Mayor Mamdani needs to do is put a lot of band-aids on the city's financial situation. One example where costs were really running away was on a voucher program that the city council had created to give people free housing. That is something that is coming in billions of dollars over estimates. Another place is the welfare rolls, the cash assistance payments that the city has to make. Those are coming in way over budget. There are a number of areas where the city just wasn't being responsibly managed, and we saw that in the form of agencies under budgeting. We saw that in the form of costs coming in much higher than expected for new programs. So the first thing Mamdani has to do is essentially stabilize the patient. And to do that, he needs to take a really hard look at every facet of city government. He hasn't done that yet. He appointed a number of chief savings officers in state agencies. They're supposed to report to him. We still haven't seen what they've come back to him with suggestions for savings. The real danger is that he's going to be too gentle with his approach to city agencies. The biggest single agency in New York City is the Department of Education. They oversee the schools. Their budget has increased well, much faster than inflation over the past few years. And that's happened as enrollment has declined by over 100,000 students compared to before the pandemic.
And the other interesting aspect, I think, is I think it came out with the comptroller report, at least initial response on it, was relying on some of these revenue streams that might not be so reliable and expecting that. And then you put that, throw this in there. I think that's the other issue here is if those other revenue streams fall, what happens then?
The single most irresponsible part of what we saw from Mayor Mamdani this week was the idea that you should fund these bloated programs on revenues that might not be there in a year. We saw it in 2001, we saw it in 2008, we saw it in 2020. When you lean on the taxes that come from Wall Street bonuses and corporate profits, you have to recognize that that is money that is not necessarily going to be there 12 months or 24 months from now. For the mayor to try to take what are already, oversized agencies and try to keep them operating on new money that may not exist a year from now is just a recipe for disaster.
How does the governor win in this situation?
The governor still holds all the cards. She has tremendous powers under Article 7 of the state constitution, and she will be ultimately in a very strong position to go and win this fight.
The 1.5, I think that was on Monday or Tuesday, out of the budget. Could that have been maybe setting the stage for when we see these one house budgets in March for the legislature, who Zohran Mamdani has allies in, to come back with more in the budget to say, hey, we'll give you the 5 billion to clean this up. You got to figure it out from there. To say here's a bone, and the legislature is going to come back, and that does give more of a room for a compromise out of just chunks of budget money.
Another big problem here is that you've had a contingent in the state legislature that views increasing taxes as virtuous. That is to say, it's a goal unto itself. So they're looking for any kind of excuse to raise taxes. They want to raise taxes on a day that ends in Y. And if you pair that pressure now with Mayor Mamdani demanding more, that definitely complicates things for the governor. But she's drawn a pretty clear line that she doesn't want to increase taxes because she looks at the numbers. She recognizes that the state is home to a shrinking share of millionaires nationally. We've seen major concerning signs of tax base erosion as people who previously were paying taxes in New York State are paying taxes to other states instead. Or worse, they're limiting their time in New York, which means they have the ability to control how much time they're spending in New York, and they are choosing to limit that time. We're also seeing two new stock exchanges open in Texas over the coming months. These are all things that are probably keeping Governor Hochul awake at night.
When it comes, you mentioned the raising taxes aspect, and I think that the Mamdani had said we just want to do that in New York City for the wealthy, right? I believe that was something that he was on the record as. But all of this, do you see that now applying to the rest of the state and not just the wealthy potentially, if all this is necessary from his standpoint?
What you're asking if he'd raise taxes.
If he's asked,
Sorry.
right, he's saying, he wants to raise taxes on the wealthy in New York City, but his asks right now, when it comes to trying to fund what's going on in New York, like we said, this is tip of the iceberg stuff, right? When it comes to trying to fund his proposals, when it tries to fix this deficit, if all that this ask, could it be should it be, will it be expanded beyond New York City? Do you see that? Like, we talk
Gotcha.
about the
I see what you're
legislature
asking.
wanting to expand this and be able to pay for this, and like I said, you have the 1.5 billion, but if that bloats to 5, 6, 7, 8 billion in the state budget, would that require taxing people outside of New York City at the end of the day?
The mayor is looking for permission to increase taxes on businesses and individuals in New York City. Now, that overlaps with the interest in Albany among state lawmakers to increase state taxes and state income taxes, state corporate taxes, with the idea that you could apply these taxes statewide. The bulk of the money is going to come from New York City, so it's kind of part of the calculus that you could justify sending more money to New York City in one form or another if you're doing things statewide. But those are two very different things. It's one thing to give the mayor of New York City permission to do something within the city. It's another thing to impose something on a statewide basis. And then you get into the political calculus of how you basically, split up the loot from the heist.
Finally, what do we see happening next here? Obviously the state's in the middle of their budget, and now New York City's unveiled theirs. The 30-day amendments coming out, the legislature. What are we waiting for? And what's the next shoe to drop?
We'll next see what amendments Governor Hochul files as part of the budget process. That will show any changes that she's making to her spending plan or to the policy proposals that are attached to that. We'll also, in the second week of March, see what are called one house proposals from the Senate Democrats and the Assembly Democrats in terms of what they want to do with taxes and spending. They haven't been bashful about pushing for higher taxes, and I think they are maintaining their longstanding goal of putting pressure on Governor Hochul to agree to that. But she's drawn a pretty good line in the sand here because she recognizes that there are serious threats to New York's economic competitiveness, and there are states, especially Texas, which is now about to open two new stock exchanges, waiting to eat Albany's lunch.